want to know about the craft, about how you go. I mean, how many people here want to be writers, or are writers who want to break into comics? So it's really more about how to and how to break in. Is that safe to say that's kind of what you guys are looking for?
Or process? You have questions about process?
Would it be best if we just took questions?
Are you guys like the chatty kind of audience, or are you guys gonna stare at us? Because we'll do questions, but you guys gotta actually ask some.
I've got a question.
All right, Sarah, you in the front.
When you have a really cool new idea for a comic or a character, what do you do with it? Like, do you start drawing pictures, or do you go and start writing backstory, or what direction do you go with it when you get this cool idea that you want to work on?
I think it's different for everybody. I think any idea that gets you excited is probably a good idea, but then when you say, I'm gonna write a story, then a story needs a certain structure, and then, in order for there to be any story that you write in any medium, there has to be a character who wants something, who goes after it, and something or someone tries to stop him from getting it. Like, that's the basis of all stories. So if you don't have that, you don't have a story. You can have a premise, like, oh, what if you did this thing with like these robots with like broom handles and ninjas? That's a premise, it's not a story. So you need a character who has a want or a need that has to be fulfilled. And then the story is about trying to fulfill that need. So that's the first step, is you have to say, what is my story? Who is it? What does he want? And how is he going to get it? Now, you don't have to have anything in between. You can have a guy, a guy's mailman was murdered, and he wants to find out who killed his mailman. So that's the start of the story, and then just build outward from that. Would you agree?
What do you do, he's asking. What do you do specifically?
Well, I mean, it all depends. Like, I tend to write things that I find are important in my life. So I like to write about, I don't like to say theme, because theme is something that comes after you've written it, really. But I'll ask myself, what do I want to write about? I did a 6-issue self-published book called Foster. For anyone who's read it, it's basically about it's like a 70s era Vietnam veteran whose next door neighbor goes missing, and she leaves her 6-year-old son home alone. So he takes the kid in, and turns out there are these monsters that live among people, and they want that kid. So really the story is about him protecting this child from the horrors of the world. So what I wanted to write about, and the reason why I came up with that whole idea was because I have a son who at the time was like 10, 11, and I wanted to write about fatherhood, and specifically, different from motherhood, like the need to protect your child from, like, physically from the horrors of the world is something that's very male, and I think it's something that, you struggle with. When you let your child out into the world, you're worried that something's going to happen to him. So I wanted to write about that. So that's where the story came from.
I think there are two different ways to start, and I think it depends on which component you have first. So if you have a character first, but you don't have a premise, but you just have an interesting character, well, then it's about finding the right premise that makes that character that much more interesting, or exploits the things that you find about the character that are to be interesting. And the opposite is true, where if you have a premise, then you have to find what is the drive, what is the story that takes advantage of that premise. So like for Cowl, for example, if the premise is about it's organized superheroes in the 60s, right? So it's political. It's kind of like, it's Jimmy Hoffa's Mad Men if Mad Men were, the Justice League, right? Okay, well, that's a premise. So what's an interesting way to explore that idea? Well, what if there was no one to fight? So if they have this contract with the city, but there's no need for them, there's no actual work, then how do they justify their existence? And then the decisions that they start to make in order to justify their existence, and does that blur the line between what a hero is and so you try to find ways to explore things, and I guess that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I have a thing where I call the 12, I'm in the 12-step program. The 12-step program is like, I force myself to find 12 ways, like you just talked about. What are the ways? Explore the ways that this could go down. I force myself to find 12 ways it could go down. Even if like by way number 2, I think, that is fucking great, that's the way. I'm not seduced by that way, or I try to resist the seduction. But I force myself to come up with 12 different ways that this story could happen. so that really all the angles, or many, many angles, are covered. And then what you find is that you've got one of those 12, or maybe two of those 12 is any good, really, at the end of it. And 10 of them are, you know, what you've seen in TV and film and comics over the last, 30 years. And you've buried it somewhere in your unconscious and it's coming through, but you know that it's kind of a tired concept. So I think that's part of it, is like, you got to push yourself to really explore that world and figure out what's the angle and the fundamentals of what does this character want and what is he going for and what are the obstacles there have to be part of that, obviously, but you've really got to push yourself.
And I think the other thing too is figuring out whether your character and your world, sometimes both, lend themselves to a contained story, to a sprawling, not sprawling, but a kind of an ongoing story. Yeah, there's a big difference between writing a miniseries and writing an ongoing series, or film TV, right? Writing a film versus writing a TV show. The engine of the story is going to be different. What the character is going through is going to be different as well. A contained story, so like Foster, a 5-issue story. Now that could obviously, there is more there that you can expand going forward. But the arc for Foster is between him and this kid, and it's really him finding his humanity again. That's a very contained arc, And so, like, if you're structuring something and you have a starting point for the character and an end point for the character, that's going to be a contained thing. So it's just kind of being aware of what your idea, what medium it kind of works best in.
And it's very controversial. A lot of writers don't like plotting. Like Stephen King always talks about, he can't understand people who plot. Like, how boring is that to know your story before you start writing it? Whereas other writers are like, you can't not know your ending before you start. How do you know where you're going? But Stephen King's like, I come up with a circumstance. A writer gets basically kidnapped by his biggest fan. That's like a circumstance I came up with, and then Misery just came out of that, and I didn't know where it was going. I just started writing based on that circumstance. So all writers do things differently, but
I think it's easier to do in novels.
Yeah, but I agree.
I think it's easier.
You can't really expect to be a genius. There's certain guys that just Quentin Tarantino. The first script he ever finished, he sold. You know what I mean? Like, Stephen King's written a bazillion books, so we're going to assume that all of us here are not geniuses, and we have to work for it. So ask yourself first, why am I writing it?
2 parts. What is your process? Do you write outlines? Do you scene so? Do you write from a character's perspective? And then, how do you decide what voice to write in?
I think for me, I don't like to do I do outlining, and I like to use index cards because they're tangible, and I put them up on the wall and I can move them around. Like, if you have, let's say, a scene in your head, you have if they're not connected, what I like about index cards is that I can write on index cards and I put it up on my wall and I can move it around. Some people do lots of, they can do a grid, you can do, whatever, is your particular thing. I like index cards. I don't like to take those index cards and write them down again because I have a real issue with writing something twice. So if I take the time to actually write a long outline or treatment, I feel like I've done it already. So when it comes time to writing it, I feel like all the creativity I have, I've lost it because I spent all this time working on this other document. So I personally, when I first started, I did it more, but now I don't. Like, I generally just go from the cards to the actual writing. What are your guys' process?
For me, it varies depending on the project and whether it's work for hire or creator owned. Like for DC, for example, there's very much an outline process that you have to go through on the book. So I tend to outline regardless, but I don't outline very, very tightly usually. Actually, the thing I really like about writing comics is that a 5-issue arc or a 6-issue arc, like I've seen this a lot with like Batman Beyond right now, for example. 5 issues of Batman Beyond is basically a feature worth of material for me. but it's not as, doesn't feel as daunting because I know what the story is. I may not have it all super tight down to the page or anything like that, because I think that there's very much a thing that of over outlining. But I'm basically writing, you know, a sequence every week and a half, and then it's, you know, and then you polish it, and that goes to the print. And so before you know it, you've written this whole story that would have felt daunting to just tackle all at once, but because you're getting feedback and seeing pages come in and everything, like, it kind of inspires you, and sometimes the story goes in a different direction based on an artist's strengths or weaknesses or what they want to draw, you know. I tell a funny story about Deathstroke where I knew what the first issue was locked, I knew what the second issue was, and I kind of knew what the general arc was going to be, but then Joe Bennett started messaging me on Facebook, and I asked him, you know, Joe, if there's ever anything you want to draw, you know, will you please let me know? He wrote back, he said, I want to draw submarines. And I said, okay, and he said, like Hunt for Red October, just a massive submarine. And he's like, I said, okay, well, a lot of this takes place in Detroit. So I'm not sure, I mean, I guess there could be a museum for like an Antietam-class submarine, sure. And so it turned into this big set piece, and Joe was so excited that the amount of detail that he put in these pages was amazing. Just massive, like the bad guy picks up a submarine and just like smashes Deathstroke with it. And then that turned into the fallout for like another issue or two, and it totally changed the direction of the story. But I knew what my ending was going to be, and I knew what I needed to get to, so a lot of that was malleable. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah.
But
Outlining is essential for me too. Even if I don't have to show it to anyone, I need it, you know, to keep me on track, and also just to. I like getting, you know, chunks of the work done.
Yeah.
So if you feel like, oh, I've just accomplished something, it, you know, really excites you and compels you to move on to the next step. So I tend to outline everything for corporate books, like I did an Escapist, you know, Michael Chabon's book. They required that I handed an outline. I'm doing a book for IDW right now called Indestructible. Again, like I had to outline 5 issues, you know, 5-issue arc, or 6-issue arc. I had to outline, you know, all 6 issues and get that approved before I went to the next step. So I tend to do a larger outline for the arc, and then I do individual book level outlines, which tend to be a page and a half outline, and then once those are approved, you know, just start writing. And even for Taddeo Whiskey on Earth, I'm doing an outline. I'm not showing it to the artist because I want him to be surprised and excited. You know, usually he's really happy with the script, so I don't show him the outline because I don't want to spoil the surprise. I've never asked him if he wanted, you know, is there anything you want to draw? Let me know. But he always gives me, you know, great ideas. You know, he wanted to draw the devil, so I was like, all right, the devil's going to be in, you know, the next arc, and yeah, so.
And there's the other, real quick, the other thing is there's definitely a difference, at least for me, between outlining for like an arc or a series versus individual issues. So like my series arc or my mini-series arc, whatever it is, the back half of it's going to be looser, but I know what my big points are. But then when I get to that issue to write, it's very deep. Like I write a very detailed outline that I then actually will cut and paste into my script documents under page breakdowns, because then it gives me, you're not staring at a blank page.
I do the same thing.
Yeah, same thing too.
And then it's like, okay, I've got a big chunk here, a bunch of work done. And so then it's like, if I feel stuck or if I am uninspired, it's like, I have 1 of 2 ways to go. I can just start writing dialogue for that page or that sequence, or I can just keep expanding on that initial paragraph that describes that page to the point where it's like you're overflowing with like, no, I know what he says here, and then you write the dialogue, you know, and so it's a way to kind of kickstart yourself.
It's also very different if you're writing for yourself or you're work for hire. Work for hire, I mean, you have to turn in outlines, you have to turn in a pitch, and in DC they ask for like this 6-month overview when they ask some really bizarre questions on this overview. But, you know, so depending on who you're working for or what you're writing for, you know, you're going to have to meet certain criteria. Like for myself, I'm actually pretty good at keeping the story in my head.
Yeah.
So I keep it very loose when I'm doing my own stuff. But even with DC work, once they have like the one page, I don't give them anything until I I turn in, if that gets approved, I go straight to script, because I can write, fast enough that I can turn it in, and then, we can go round and round if there needs to be, and there usually are some kind of, notes that are given.
And what about voice?